All right, welcome to Ask Me Anything. And we're now at the point in the semester where we're moving into Module 7. Again, make sure that you look at the instructions that are under Module 7 carefully and notice how things are going to be laid out. Again, for the rest of the semester, we're going to be in Module 7 and 8, but Module 7 is going to run over the next 6 weeks. That's inclusive of our fall break. And the text that we're going to be working on, again, are Exodus 19, 3-6, 20, 8-11, 21, 1-11, 32, 7-14, and 40, 34-38. Make sure you watch the video on the format. I have it laid out in writing, and I talk about that in the modules. Also, make sure you look. I have a little article called Tips that's in there that has a basic rubric on how this ends up being graded. And you'll note that I give a huge percentage of the grade is just on the part 1, which is what we've worked on a little bit in class. And this is what I want to spend the most time on today is it's your theological synthesis. Make sure you're writing in 2 to 3 sentences your understanding of the passage, and the key of being closer to an A than not an A is to move from merely describing the content of the text to being interpretive in an explicit and substantive way about what the text actually means, right? And so you can look at, we went over those statements in class, and I made some critiques of the ones in class. There's several examples, the last couple of modules of some theological statements. You can also see the statements that I made on module 4, for example. So you want to be really specific there. Again, this is 2 to 3 sentences. No, that's not a good color. 2 to 3 sentences here. Your second part of your paper is what is said about the subject. And in this one, this is where you're essentially doing more traditional exegesis like you'd see in a commentary. It doesn't have to be verse by verse, but that's the flow. You're going to talk about the structure of the passage. You're going to talk about key challenges. And what I'm going to be looking for are you aware of the key interpretive issues or challenges that need to be addressed? That would include things, and what I'll look for, the best papers will have spotted the places where the Hebrew language makes a difference. Maybe it's a key word. Maybe it's a place where your English translations are saying different things, and can you explain the interpretive options using Hebrew grammar? Now, what you don't have to do is you don't have to go through and do grammatical analysis and everything, so I don't need to read parsing. You only are going to rehearse the grammar where it's exegetically significant. In other words, where how your understanding of the grammar clarifies specifically what the text means. Now, other things that you can look for in this section, again, structure, meaning of key words, meaning of key phrases, meaning of key historical background stuff. It's important. Then the last section part, and this is the longest sections. This whole thing's 1,200 words. This is roughly about 4 pages if you use normal margins and stuff. So this is 2 to 3 sentences. This is like roughly 2 pages, a little bit over. And then the last section, part 3, is going to be maybe a half a page or so. And that's what is the significance of what is said. And here you're going to be a little bit more theological in the sense that you can think about, what role does the text play in the wider book of Exodus, in the building of an Old Testament theology? I mean, what are the theological themes that show up? And you can also think about in the sense of starting an application, what does this teach the church? And there's different ways and different emphases. You're going to have to make decisions because you only have 1,200 words here. But I want to see some movement into some theological reflection on the last part. But again, part 2 is the most detailed section. You have to make decisions on that. So this is what's going to be due the next couple of weeks. I do want to encourage everyone, again, it's a quick turnaround this week. 19:3-6 is a fantastic passage. But if you don't have time to get right on it this week on Module 7, try to do the next one simply so that you have time to take the feedback that I give you before you write the next paper. You know, if you start pulling down into the end, you're essentially risking not having any feedback on your first paper before you write your second paper. If you don't care, that's fine. Most people write these two. I'm just going to say it, but you're basically writing the second one blind because, you know, I have about a week to get the papers back, and if it's a great week, maybe it's back early, but if it's not a great week, I'm doing them on Saturday morning, and your paper's coming in Saturday night. So just be aware of that. So I do recommend, if you want to get feedback, do one of the first two. There'll be a quicker turnaround. And again, and you also have the option of writing more than 2 papers if you want to. If you don't like the grade in the first one, or you just want practice. Now, also, what's required, the weeks you don't write the papers, I still want you reading the Fredheim commentary in these sections, and I will have a discussion board open for some discussion. Again, I'm not going to have strict requirements on how many posts in. I just want interesting posts. So I do hope you'll take advantage. Again, I have lots of really good videos, and this is kind of the heart of the Exodus. So even if you aren't writing the papers, plan to spend a couple hours going over notes, videos, and then asking any questions that you have in the conversation boards so you can get the maximum out of the class. And so that's all I'm going to say about Module 7. We'll be doing a couple more of these Zoom calls over the course of the term, so I'll have some chance to come in and ask some additional materials about the specifics of these passages. Now, I do have a couple folks live, oh, by the way, before you answer your question, if you don't want to be on the video, you can turn your video off and still ask your question. If you don't care, just leave it like it is. But that's kind of up to you. So, Sean, you said you had a couple questions.
Well, my questions, and I don't know if this is the kind of thing we can ask, it involves the grammatical analysis in 19.5. And just, and I think I kind of know the answer. It seems that I have to make a determination on how contingent I think the results are on the actions in 19.5. And I think Fredheim, and I've looked at a couple other people, don't all come down the same way on the if you obey and keep my covenant, then what the if then. I think Fredheim seems to more indicate that the covenant is already there. This is more how they'll be used going forward, and Gowan and some other people are different. But my question is with the I guess the you will obey, which is the column perfect, could either be a future, and as I read future, I read it to sort of, if I look at Arnold Choi, future seems to indicate expected to happen.
Right.
And it describes an action anticipated or announced, and then it gives examples for a king will reign over us, you shall go. So it sort of indicates more of a you will obey versus if you will obey, which seems a little bit more contingent. And is that the sort of thing I just need to figure out for me, whether I think it's...
Yeah, and this is the kind of stuff I want to see out of the grammar. Now, one of the things you do want to note is that there's a couple things going on there, and this is, you want to note there's the word obey. There's also an infinitive. It's the same thing. You want to work through that, and then the other piece is the very fact that you have the particle if that shows up. That sets it up as a conditional clause. And part of that is answering your own question, because it's not just an imperfect future, right? It's inside of a conditional clause. So if you want to play around with Arnold Choi a little bit more, since you're asking a really specific Hebrew question, I would suggest taking a look at 5.2.2, which is the whole business about conditions, and asking whether or not it's real or unreal. Like because that's what you're kind of getting at. What's the contingent piece that's there?
Okay.
As in, if literally hypothetical, or is it if that means closer to when, right? Because sometimes an if can mean when. Like if you're at work, I could say, if you drive home, be careful, but that really means when you drive home, be careful, right? I mean, that's not a really good example, but that's it's the expectation that the if can mean when. Or like, you can think of it like in Philippians, if there is any comfort in Christ, make my joy complete. Paul isn't like hypothetically saying if there's any comfort, he's assuming there is comfort. So that if is really a real reality. You can just say when in that case. So that's kind of the question you're asking. What's the force? It's what's the if actually mean in relation with the imperfect? So take a look at that section and you're doing, in your case, you're doing pretty good with the grammar. You could be playing around with some of the advanced stuff in Arnold Choi, but that's actually a clause question you're actually asking. So take a look at that section on clauses and
Okay.
the conditional one. And that's true for everybody too. You can look up these other particles that show up as well.
Yeah, and then the other one was sort of the same, and it was the call conjunctive perfect, then you shall be, which is the then part of the if then, and it struck me that was apodictic, and which sort of says in a conditional statement. Now, I guess once again, I have to go back to determine how conditional it really is before I can determine whether. So am I at least on the right path, I guess, is my
Absolutely.
question.
I mean, that you're already down underneath the text and you're sitting there pondering the basics, which, I mean, I was just doing my Ask Me Anything from my IBS class, and it's the first level class, and and everybody wants to hit the depth to a text, but the way to get to any depth is to like almost play dumb and start with absolute basics. And what you've just illustrated with your question is you're basically at your baseline. It's almost like I always call it the Bill Clinton exegetical question. It goes back to
What is it?
Yeah, what's the meaning of is, right? I mean, that was really funny. And I'm like, oh, that's an exegetical question. The president a terrible joke for video, of course, so I apologize for that. But that's the thing. Don't assume things, right? And so you're asking what's the force of something. Sometimes you can answer those, sometimes you can't, but those are the kind of things that the commentators are splitting off on. And, in some cases, whether it's an unreal or a real condition, that's going to send you off two different channels. But the very fact that you've stopped and not just rush through the text, that you're digging into the kind of issues that I'm looking for. So that's exactly what you're on the right track. You're hitting the basics. Start with the basics, and the basics lead you into deeper and deeper parts of the passage and let you come up with really substantive results.
Okay. All right. Well, I've done some of that. So yeah, it's still early in the week. I'm hoping to dig a little deeper, but
okay.
I'll let whoever else is on here ask questions.
Sure, let's see. I think we only have one other person with this. I'm trying to think the last name. I think this might be Brian, but I'm not positive. Do you have a question?
It's actually Spencer. But
wrong last name. I'm sorry. Now I remember.
You're fine. I joined 5 minutes late, so I might have missed this when you were talking about these synthesis things, and I can't figure out how to look at Zoom and go to a different website at the same time. So rather than deal with that, when you're talking about a theological synthesis, is there like a question or like a base point that you have already lined out for us in that, or is it mostly just after we've read the section in the commentary, we kind of have developed our own like idea that we would like to flesh out?
Yes, because you can think of it like if you're writing a research paper, this would be your thesis. Now, the way I would describe it is it's different than just a thesis on a research paper, because what you're trying to do is, and you should write your theological synthesis after you've done most of the exegesis.
Okay.
And so essentially what you're doing is you're saying, if I'm going to summarize substantively what I've decided my take is on this passage, that's what I'm looking for. And so 2 to 3 sentences. And I'm calling it a synthesis because you're pulling together your interpretation. And again, you want it to be a summary of your interpretation, your interpretive take, not a description of the content of the passage.
Okay.
Like if you go back and look at my notes on module 4, it's pretty clear what I think about the hard heart business in there. That would be an example of one of those. And then I have, I don't know when you came on, but there's several documents that we've had the previous couple modules that have some examples of different types of statements. Now, there isn't a wooden right way to write one. So that's why I've included examples, but the things that I'm looking for, it's 2 to 3 sentences.
Yeah.
Substantive.
Okay.
In case that it's not just a generic summary of what you found. It's substantive and it's explicit in the sense it's completely obvious to me as an informed student of this passage what your interpretive take is, right? So substantive, specific, explicit, those would be the words that I want to use for that.
Okay. So hypothetically, we were talking about Exodus 19:5, where it was like the different conditional, like future certainty. So let's say I went off on that and I was like, wow, it looks like it says you will obey my voice, and then you will be my treasure. Yeah. Therefore, my theological synthesis, obviously with much more substance behind it, would be something like, looking at this context, and specifically in Exodus 19, the Hebrew seems to reveal to us that God is going to make them be obedient in the future. Therefore, they will become his treasure. And then you go from there into revealing like what is said, and then like probably delving into the different commentaries and into the Hebrew, and then going into the significance of it, talking about the book of Exodus in the Old Testament, and then what this has implications for today from your notes behind you.
Yeah, that's basically, that's the idea. And
okay.
You'd want, and you just kind of made something up there, and there'd be some different ways of framing that. Yeah, and let me go back to this too, because what you just said reminds me, I should have made clear also. You are going to be using secondary resources in this. So you're going to do obviously some of your own work, some of your own careful observations, but now you're going to write a paper, and you do have the opportunity to actually do some research as well. So you're going to want to document your resources, use footnotes, and you want to use at minimum 2 to 3. I mean, that's minimum. So I would say that's like, if you do a really good job, that'd be like B level would be 2 to 3 scholarly resources. Of course, you can use Fredheim. You can use the dictionary, use the index in the dictionary to find articles, but then jump on to Asbury Scholar or use some of the other commentaries that I've listed in the bibliography, and and make sure you've footnote when you use these secondary resources.
I think my last question with this part of the conversation would then be, with that claim, even if we pretend that that's the one I use, would I then obviously use the resources that I find to substantiate what I say, or would I also find some that like are in opposition to what I say, or both? Because I think of, go ahead.
Yeah, you want to frame out an interpretation. You want to show why your version is better than alternatives. And that's what I mean by dealing with the substantive interpretive questions. And so what I'm looking for is that you're actually aware of those things, and that you show why a certain construal of the data is better than an alternative.
Okay.
Because that's going to be a show that to be able to see that you've cut through ambiguity versus tunnel vision on one thing is the mark of a superior exegetical paper.
Okay.
All in 1,200 words, so you get to split the Red Sea, make the axe head float, feed the 5,000 this week. That's the goal here.
Yeah, it's not that many words, actually. I think you made me think of one more thing, and then I'll stop. Would be our target audience, so to speak, with this. It wouldn't be like for like preaching or teaching. This would be like what we would have before that, and then we would like reduce this almost to.
That's where the synthesis is really supposed to help, because basically what you have, if you're going to be preaching or teaching on this 2 to 3 sentences is your hip pocket talking points that you have locked in your mind. And then these are your exegetical notes. And then you would develop, whatever you're going to do with the passage. This can then be developed into, for a specific popular audience, a teaching piece, a sermon, a devotion or whatever. But this is your scholarly, this is your academic exegetical work that serves as the basis or the fuel for exposition. So your audience here is really you can think of me. I'm your ultimate audience essentially you're writing for a person that's going to be preaching, teaching off of this passage. So, no illustrations are sitting in here. This is just meat and potatoes, exegetical insights.
Can I use I language then, or is it supposed to be ambiguous? Kind of like.
I mean, why would you use? I'm just trying to think. I mean, if you're just saying, I think the passage means, or something like that, I suppose. But I mean, you're not necessarily making app. I mean, I don't.
No, not like oh, let's apply it. Like when reading the passage, I think that this has a greater weight than this school of thought because I look at Freethrum and.
Yeah, you even see like, I mean, I was just reading one of Ben Witherington's books on the Psalms, and he uses like I just opened it up to a random page. This brings us to Hayes' even more intriguing treatment. So he's using first person language. So yeah, as long as you're not making, kind of rudimentary applications, you can use right as in the first person.
I just wanted to make sure because I know some people prefer it to be like abstract. Like one might assume that this is that, or when one considers.
You have to decide. You have to find your tone. I'm not worried about that as long as you can use first person and keep it scholarly and objective. That's that's kind of the key thing. But I mean, you can say we or I. Fine.
Okay.
Whatever. I find this the more compelling interpretation because I mean that's appropriate.
Okay.
All right. Anything else today, gentlemen?
That's all I have. Thank you.
I think that's it for me too.
Okay. Well, we'll do this again in a couple weeks. I'll make sure I'll try to schedule some of these out more in advance. I just kind of struck me a lot this week, and I need to get on here. So for those of you who weren't able to join live, sorry for the late notice, but it's on video, and you'll have several more opportunities the rest of the semester. If you have any questions, again, email me. I'm available for Zoom consultations on a one-on-one if we need to, but start with an email and we can set something up, and look forward to reading some excellent work. And I plan on getting some more Hebrew videos created over the next couple of weeks too. So thanks, and we'll see you next time.